A beaten widow collapsed on his porch at midnight, clutching 3 starving children. The knocking was wrong. Not wrong like a neighbor, nobody neighborly knocked at that hour. Wrong in its weight. Like something hitting wood with no real strength behind it, just the last of something trying to stay upright. I'd been lying awake anyway. I'd given up on sleep around 52, maybe 53. Now I was 61 and I just lay there in the dark and listened to the land settle. Boards contracting. The old gelding shifting in the paddock. Wind off the flats in November carrying nothing but cold. I knew every sound that place made. I'd been hearing them alone long enough. That knock wasn't one I knew. I didn't rush. I pulled my boots on in the dark, habit, 20 years of habit, and took the rifle off the wall without thinking much about it, the way you take a hat. The lamp was already lit by the time I got to the door. When I opened it, I near about stepped on her. She was on her knees on the porch boards, one hand still raised like she'd been trying to knock again and couldn't manage it. Woman, maybe 35, maybe looked older than that. Her lip was split and had dried. Left eye mostly closed. She had her coat pulled open around 3 kids, smallest couldn't have been 3 years old, pressed flat against her chest, and 2 others crowded under each arm, all of them in night clothes. The 2 older ones were looking up at me, the way animals look at you when they've stopped deciding whether to trust you, and have just collapsed into kneading. The woman said something. Low, it came out broken. I leaned down. She said, "I don't know where else." That was it. I said, "All right," and I reached down and got my arm under her and lifted. She was lighter than she should have been. The smallest child made a sound and grabbed my shirt, and I just kept moving. My name is Harlan Kress. Most people in that county had forgotten it or never known it much to begin with. I ran cattle on 340 acres of hardpan that my father had broken his back on and that I had spent 30 years breaking mine on, and which had given back just enough to keep going and not 1 nickel more. My wife, Nora, died in the winter of '71. Fever took her in 4 days. We'd had no children. After that, I just worked. I got up before light and I worked until I couldn't see, and then I slept and did it again. The ranch needed it. The work needed it. I needed to need it. I wasn't hard to live around. I wasn't mean. I just wasn't much. The neighbor I had to the east, Birch Halstead, he'd said to me once, we were mending wire together, not even looking at each other, he said, "Harlan, you're the kind of man people forget about until they need something." He didn't mean it cruel. He was just Birch, but I thought about that more than I should have. That was the year before she landed on my porch. I got her inside and onto the settee. The 3 kids came in around her like they were fastened to her. The oldest was a boy, maybe 9 or 10, with a jaw set like he'd already decided he had to be the man of something, except he was shaking. Girl next, 7 or 8, hair loose and tangled. The little one, the boy, maybe 2.5, he'd fallen asleep against me when I carried him in and he didn't wake up. Just stayed like that, his fist still in my shirt. I didn't put him down. I moved around the kitchen one-handed, got the stove going. I had cornbread from that morning wrapped in cloth, and I set it on the table, and the older 2 went at it without looking at me or each other. Just ate with their hands in fast, quiet bites, the way hungry children eat when they've learned not to make noise doing it. The woman sat up. She was watching me. I brought her a cup of water and she drank it slow and steady and didn't take her eyes off me once. "Who are you running from?" I said, not a question. She said, "My husband's brother." A pause. "He thinks the land that was Abel's is his now." "Is it?" "No." I didn't ask more. The little boy stirred against me, resettled, went still. I reached back one-handed and pulled the rocker from the corner and sat down in it with him, and that's where I was when she told me the rest of it. She told it quiet and without any particular feeling, the way people tell things when they've already lived through them and have no more room for feeling. Her husband Abel had died of a burst appendix 6 weeks prior. His brother Denton had come to the house 3 days after the burial claiming the deed. She'd shown him the papers. He'd torn them up. She'd gone to town for the law, and the law out there was a man named Cutter who played cards with Denton on Saturdays. She'd left with the children that night. 2 weeks of moving, staying with a woman in Gila Bend, then moving again when Denton found them there. She'd heard there was a rancher up this road who kept to himself. She said, "I didn't know your name. The road ended here." "My name's Harlan," I said. "Road ends here because I'm the last one on it." She said, "I'm me." "All right," I said again. That seemed to be the word I had. I gave them my room and I slept on the floor of the main room with my saddle blanket and the rifle in reach. First 2 nights I didn't sleep much anyway, just listened. The wind, the horses, the land settling, and somewhere under all of it the sound of 3 children breathing unfamiliar, small, real. It had been a quiet house for 9 years. I hadn't minded the quiet, but that sound. I won't try to explain it. Third morning she was up before me. I came out and the stove was going and there was coffee and she'd found the flour and done something with it, not quite biscuits, not quite flapjacks, something between, and the kids were eating and the oldest boy, whose name was Thomas, was looking at me with that jaw set again. I looked back at him and he didn't look away. I said, "You know how to mend wire?" He said, "No, sir." "You'll learn today," I said. That jaw lost some of its set. Not all of it, just some. He ate his breakfast faster. The thing about having people on a place, I'd forgotten that. How work goes differently. The boy was with me most of the day. He didn't talk much. Neither did I. We pulled fence line on the south pasture, and I showed him how to work the pliers and he tore up his hands some and didn't complain about it, which I respected. The girl, Clara, she found the barn cat family I'd been ignoring for 2 seasons and spent the whole morning in there. Came out at noon with straw in her hair and a self-satisfied look. The little one, Edgar, he followed me around the yard in a serious businesslike way, carrying things she handed him, very important about it. I watched me when she didn't know I was watching. She moved around that place, my place, like she was reading it, testing the weight of things. She fixed the water barrel I'd been meaning to fix for a month. She found a split board on the porch and wedged it with a piece of scrap. She went through my larder late that afternoon with a look that was not complaining but was very much counting, and when I came to the door of the kitchen she said, without turning around, "You'll need to go to town for flour and salt pork, and I think your lamp oil is low." "I know it's low," I said. "Are you going to go to town?" "Not yet." She turned around then. "Because of Denton." "I don't know Denton," I said, "but I'm not going to leave you here alone until I do." She looked at me, a long look, then she turned back around and kept counting. 4 days in I drove to town. Left before first light, got there at mid-morning, kept my eyes moving, bought what we needed and asked a few quiet questions, not of Cutter. Of the woman who ran the dry goods, who'd been running it since before I could remember, and who knew everything in a 20-mile radius. She told me Denton Voss was a man who'd been running a rough crew out of a property that wasn't his for going on 2 years. She told me he'd run the Alderman family out of their place the prior spring by burning their barn. She said the law wouldn't touch him because Cutter was afraid of him or in his pocket, one of the two. I bought what I needed. I drove home. That night after the children were in bed, I sat with me at the kitchen table and I told her what I'd found. She listened. When I was done, she said, "I can't put this on you. This isn't your trouble." "No," I said, "but it's here." "Harlan." "Me," I looked at her. "I know what I'm taking on." She was quiet for a while, then she said, "Why?" And I thought about that. I thought about Nora. I thought about Birch Halstead mending wire and saying what he'd said. I thought about 9 years of a quiet house and the sound of children breathing. I said, "Because somebody's got to, and I'm the somebody that's here." She put her hand over mine on the table. She didn't say anything, just left it there. He came on a Thursday, 12 days after she'd knocked on my door. 3 of them, Denton Voss and 2 men I didn't know. They came up the road in the late afternoon, which was deliberate, sun in a man's face if he was on the porch, which I was. I had the rifle in my lap and I didn't stand up when they rode in. Thomas was in the barn. I told him if he heard horses to stay there and stay still and put his hand on the barn cat, because the barn cat would know before he did. Clara and Edgar were inside with me. I told me where the shotgun was, and I'd made sure she knew it wasn't for warning shots. Denton Voss was a wide man going to fat, with a beard kept neat and eyes that moved fast. The kind of man who's used to rooms going quiet when he walks in. He pulled up 10 yards from the porch and looked at me like I was a fence post. He said, "I'm looking for a woman named me Voss." I said, "Don't know her." "She's my brother's widow." "That's so." He looked at the house, then back at me. "You mind if we look around?" "I do mind," I said. He smiled the way men smile when they're deciding whether they have to bother. "Old man," he said, "this doesn't concern you." "You rode up my road," I said. "Makes it my concern." The man to his left started to edge his horse sideways. I pointed the rifle at him without looking at him directly, still looking at Denton. I said, "That horse moves again, I'll put a round through its foreleg and you can walk home." Denton's smile went away. I said, "The woman you're looking for, she and those children are under my roof. That means they're mine to protect. You come up this road again, I won't be asking questions. You send someone up this road, I won't be asking questions. You go to Cutter, Cutter can come up this road and I'll show him the same welcome. I've got no particular attachment to being liked in this county, and I've got nothing you can burn down that matters more to me than what's in that house. You understand me?" A long quiet. The man to his right said something low to Denton. Denton just looked at me. Then he turned his horse and they rode back down the road, and I sat there and listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me a little. Me opened the door behind me. She came out and stood there. I didn't turn around. She was quiet, and then she put her hand on my shoulder, flat palm, firm, like she was steadying something, and I felt the weight of it go all the way through me. She said, "Are they gone?" "Yes." "Are they coming back?" I thought about it. "Maybe not," I said. Men like that, they move to easier things when they find something that won't move. Her hand stayed where it was. I put my hand over it. We stayed there until the sun got low. Now I need to tell you something about those weeks, because it wasn't all Denton Voss and rifles on the porch. Most of it was just life. The thing I had forgotten was a thing that lived in the details. Thomas mending wire, tearing his hands, not complaining, getting better at it. Getting where he'd hand me the pliers before I asked. Getting where we could work 3 hours without speaking and it was easy. One afternoon he said, out of nowhere, without looking at me, "My dad couldn't do this kind of work. He was better with books." And then he was quiet again. I said, "Nothing wrong with that." He said, "I know, I just wanted to learn this kind." We mended the rest of that line in silence and it was fine. Clara with those cats. She named all 12 of them, told me each name like I was expected to memorize it. I tried. Got maybe 4 of them right, and she corrected me with great patience every time. Edgar, Lord. Edgar found my old pair of work gloves and put them on, and they went to his elbows, and he wore them for 3 days. Just wore them. Helping. Very serious. Those gloves. And me. Mornings she'd be up first. I'd come out and there'd be coffee. I'd built a habit of putting my hand on the stove when I came in from early chores, not for warmth, just something I did, checking it. She noticed. She started having the coffee poured and on the table before I got to the stove. I never mentioned it. She never mentioned it. That's just what happened. She was a good woman, not in a soft way, in a way that had been tested and had held. She didn't ask for comfort, she found it where it was and moved on. She cried once that I saw, and I don't know if she meant me to see it. It was the 3rd week. She was out by the fence line at dusk and she had her back to the house and her shoulders went a certain way, and I turned around and went inside and gave her that. She came in for dinner and her face was clear and nothing was said. I respected her more for that than for a lot of things. I went to town again in the 4th week. different purpose. I went to see a man named Fletcher Ames who had been the county's land attorney since God was a boy and who played no cards with anybody on Saturdays. I told him about me's deed that Denton had torn up. He said a deed didn't stop existing because the paper it was written on got torn. It was recorded. He looked it up. It was there. Abel Voss had titled the land to his wife on their wedding day, which Fletcher told me was unusual and also not complicated. The land was me's. Denton had no claim. I rode home with a copy of the record in my coat pocket. I gave it to me at the kitchen table that evening. She looked at it for a long time, then she looked at me. I said, "That land's yours, clean." She said, "We're 140 miles from it." "It'll keep," I said, "or you sell it. Either way, it's yours." She held the paper. "Why did you do this?" "Because it was the right thing to do, and it was something I could do," I said. "So." She was quiet a long time. The kids were somewhere in the back of the house. The lamp was burning low. She looked at me the way, I don't know how to say this right, the way you look at something you've decided on, something settled and sure. She said, "Harlan, you know I can't go back to that land." "You don't have to. You know what I mean." I did know what she meant. I'd known for a while. I just didn't know how to say it, and I wasn't going to be the one who made assumptions. She said, "I'm not trying to put anything on you. I know. But we've been here 2 months, and Thomas has got some color back. And Clara," she stopped, pressed her lips together, and she stopped again. I said, "Me." She looked up. I said, "I haven't had a reason to get up in the morning in 9 years that felt like much. I got up because the cattle needed it, because the land needed it. That was enough." I looked at my hands on the table. "It's different now." She didn't say anything. She just got up from her chair and came around the table, and she put her arms around me from behind, her chin on the top of my head, and she held on. And I put my hands over her arms and I held on back. That's all, that was it. Winter got deep. Denton didn't come back. Either he'd found an easier mark or he'd run some kind of calculation. Fletcher Ames had sent him a letter about the deed record, which I'd asked him to do, and I suspected that helped. Men like Denton usually preferred the angle of ignorance. Once you showed them the law was real, they went looking for somewhere the law wasn't looking. Thomas and I got the south fence finished and started on the east. He'd stopped tearing up his hands. His grip was better and he knew it, and I didn't need to say so. He said to me one morning, very businesslike, "How many more years you think this place can run good cattle?" I told him the grass was thinning some on the northwest, but if we rotated and let it rest 2 seasons, it'd come back. He nodded, filed that away. I watched him do it. Clara had 17 barn cats, allegedly. I lost count. She'd named 3 of them versions of my name, which she thought was hilarious. There was a Harlan, a Harold, and a Harvey. Harvey was missing half an ear, and she told me that made him the best one. Edgar in January stopped wearing the gloves. He didn't need them anymore, he said. He had his own hands now, which had gotten some calluses on them from carrying wood in from the pile, and he showed them to me with great seriousness. I told him those were working hands. He looked at them a long time. Me and I didn't talk about what was happening between us, not in those first months. It was just there, like the house was there, like the work was there. In the evenings after the children were in bed, we'd sit at the kitchen table and she'd mend things or I'd work on the books, and sometimes we'd talk and sometimes we'd just sit. I hadn't sat with anyone in 9 years. I hadn't known how much I'd missed just that. Another person in the room. Another person who wasn't going anywhere. She laughed once, at something I said about a neighbor's bull that had gotten into my north pasture 3 years running, and had finally just been incorporated into the herd by mutual confusion. She laughed, and then she put her hand over her mouth because it surprised her, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she laughed again and didn't cover it. I thought about that laugh for 3 days. She caught me once early March just standing at the door of the barn looking at nothing. She came up beside me and stood there. I said, "Just looking." She said, "What at?" I said, "I don't know, counting things." She said, "What things?" And I said, "Good things." She was quiet. Then she said, "Me too." And we stood there. That was as close as we got to saying anything for a long time, but it was enough. Spring came hard, the way it does out there. 1 week of mud and then the grass going green almost overnight, like someone had decided it. I had Thomas out helping me on the horses, and he was getting a feel for it. A real feel, not just following instruction. He was starting to see things, the way a horse carries itself when something's bothering it, the difference in how it moves its ears. He was 9 months from when I'd first handed him pliers and he'd cut his hands on the wire. He was a different boy. Same jaw, but that jaw meant something different now. It was deciding things, not just bracing against them. One evening in April, I sat down with me and I said, "I need to ask you something." She put down what she was mending. I said, "I know this came on you hard, ending up here. I know you didn't plan it." I stopped. "I'm not a young man. This place is work. It's always going to be work. I can't offer you something easy." She watched me. "But it's a good place," I said. "The land's honest. The cattle are solid stock. There's room." I looked at the table. "There's room here for 3 children and for a woman who wants to stay." She said, "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking if you want to," I said, "because if you don't, you've got that deed. Fletcher could sell that land for you. You'd have enough to start somewhere. A town, maybe. Somewhere that didn't need this much." I looked at her. "I don't want you here out of having nowhere else." She looked at me for a long time, a long, still time. Then she said, "Harlan, I have been watching you for 5 months. I waited. I watched you pick up a child you didn't know and carry him inside without blinking. I watched you teach my son like he was worth teaching. I watched you sit on that porch with a rifle and tell a man twice my size that what was in this house was yours to protect." She paused. "I have been watching you and I know what I see." I said, "What do you see?" She said, "A man." Just that, a man. The way she said it, not as a small thing, not as a given, as a thing she'd looked for and found. I had to look away for a minute. When I looked back, she was still watching me with that same settled look, and she said, "I'm not here because I have nowhere else. I tried to leave twice, remember. You kept giving me reasons to stay." The corner of her mouth moved. "I'm not very good at leaving when I've found something worth staying for." I reached across the table. She put her hand in mine. I said, "All right then." She said, "All right." We married in June. Fletcher Ames witnessed it. Thomas stood very straight. Clara cried and then denied it. Edgar wore the work gloves. The ceremony was short. The preacher was a traveling man who came through the county every 6 weeks and who had seen enough of life not to make a production out of anything. He said the words and we said the words, and then it was done. After we stood on the porch in the evening, the kids had gone in. It was that kind of quiet that comes in early summer when the wind drops and everything just holds still. The light going orange off the flats. My land, our land. Me had her hand through my arm. She was looking at the same light I was. She said, "Thomas asked me last night if he could call this home." I said, "What did you tell him?" She said, "I told him to ask you." I looked out at the pasture, the cattle moving slow in the last light, the fence lines true, all the things I'd built and mended and kept going for 30 years alone. I said, "I'll tell him yes." She held on a little tighter, didn't say anything, didn't need to. That was it, that was all of it really. We stood there until the light was gone.